Okay, we will begin the second portion of our evening now, the forum for State Senate District 26, featuring Republican State Senator Merlin Bartz, Democratic State Senator Mary Jo Wilhelm. We've drawn cards earlier in the evening, so Mr. Bartz, you will begin with a 3-minute opening statement, followed by Mrs. Wilhelm, and you will receive the first question. You may begin.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Wendy, and the Osage Chamber of Commerce for sponsoring tonight. For all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedule to be here, and also for the media coverage. I know we have numerous media folks covering tonight. My name is Merlin Bartz. I'm currently running for State Senate District 26 and currently serving as the State Senator for District 6. With the redistricting plan, of course, approved in 2011, you know, as I know, that it created a very unique situation in that Senator Wilhelm and I ended up being placed in the only state Senate district with an incumbent Democrat and an incumbent Republican. Because 3 minutes is such a short time to do kind of an in-depth introduction, I trust that you will pick up one of my bio cards in the back or a notepad or go online and visit my website in order to find out more about my family and my occupation and the things that I believe in. But I want to make one thing perfectly clear in my opening comments tonight. I'm running for Senate District 26 because North Iowans need someone in Des Moines who knows how to work hard for their values, and I believe that my proven track record speaks for itself, whether that be working on balancing the budget, supporting real education and reform, eliminating job-killing regulations, protecting your Second Amendment rights, and defending life and traditional marriage. Now, part of doing that job in defending your values in Des Moines is also directly tied to showing up and defending our votes as we are tonight as state legislators and participating with you in the legislative process. So I think it's good that I report to you tonight what's happened over the past 18 months, at least in my particular situation. Over those past 18 months since the redistricting plan has come out, I've participated in over 50 parades, 200 plus community events, 31 town halls, right at 6,000 doors as of tonight, including my 60-some doors in Osage, about 70,000 miles that I've put on my Ford pickup. It's probably going to cross 200,000 before election night. And this is the 7th publicly sponsored forum that I have participated in. For 16 years, and throughout the last 18 months, I have chosen to dialogue with the constituents that I wish to represent. Hopefully tonight, I will be able to earn your confidence and respect regarding the issues that are important to you, and I will earn your vote in the November 6th elections. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this evening. I appreciate your time you took out of your evening to be here and listen to us debate. My name is Mary Jo Wilhelm. I'm from Cresco. For those of you who came from Winneshiek, Howard, Chickasaw, I am your state senator. For those of you that are here from Mitchell, Floyd, Worth, parts of Cerro Gordo, I hope to be your state senator. For those who don't know me, I was raised on a farm by Davis Corners. I have married for 29 years plus, 2 boys, Ben and Alex. They live in Cedar Rapids and in Iowa City. I'm a small business owner. My background is very diversified with jobs, from being a factory worker to being I worked in cancer research. I worked at the hospital and clinic in Cresco, and I was a county supervisor for 12 years. I want to share with you an interesting question I had this week. I had an opportunity to speak at a school here in Mitchell County, and this young lady asked me, she said, have you ever thought you were going to be a state senator? And my answer was absolutely, positively not. This is not my cup of tea. I feel uncomfortable sometimes in papers and on TV, but what I do feel comfortable at is being at the doors, meeting people, talking to people, listening to your issues, and try to problem solve and help you with those issues. That's what I like to do. You know, part of my background too is that my husband, I'm just like you. I mean, there's a part of my life a few years ago when I was raising my family and struggling, I had 3 jobs just to make ends meet and get my family ahead. I have a husband who works at a factory, and there's always the concern of, is that factory going to stay there? Is it going to lay off? Is it going to go overseas? I have children with high college debt that are trying to make ends meet with their jobs. You know, still I consider myself a new senator. I've been down there for 4 years. I'm a freshman. I may not know every answer, but I will tell you this. If you ask me a question, if you ask for my help, I will find the information to answer that question, and I'll find the means to help you. Again, thank you for your time this evening. I enjoyed this conversation we're here to have, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
And thank you. You both come to us fresh off the last legislative session, so you should both be able to offer some good insight into this first question, which is, there was a compromise tax bill that made it to the Senate and did not pass. Why not? We'll begin with you, Ms. Wilhelm, 3 minutes.
I think if you're talking about the property tax bill that came to the Senate, the commercial property tax bill, we actually passed a bill 2 years prior, 2 sessions prior, that passed by a vote of 46-4. I think it was very realistic commercial property tax bill. I think that with that bill especially, we didn't have to worry about the shift of potential property taxes from onto homeowners and agriculture. And I would like to revisit that and maybe modify that, but the same token, as being a previous county supervisor, we have to be very careful and cognizant of shifting property tax responsibility and liability.
Thank you for the question, Matt. I think Representative Burns actually said it best when he talked about the fact that the House had passed 4 different versions of property tax bills and had sent them over to the Senate where they died pretty heinous deaths. The real issue here is at the end of the session, over the 2-year period, after property tax had been talked about as being everybody's priority for a couple of years, the real issue is that 2/3 of the Iowa legislature and the governor agreed on the property tax bill that came over to the Senate in the last couple of days of the session. It was a compromise that was worked out. It was voted on by both Republicans and Democrats, including Northeast Iowa Democrats, Roger Thomas and Brian Quirk. It came over to the Senate, and it got caught up in partisan squabbles. And interestingly enough, on the 24-26 vote, that particular bill went down. And then when the Senate Democrats tried to pass, Senator Wilhelm being one of those, tried to pass their own version of the property tax bill, which was not agreed upon by the House and not agreed upon by the governor. They couldn't even get 26 votes to pass their own bill out of the Senate. The real key here is that without any legislation, we are scheduled in Iowa to have a $2.3 billion property tax increase in the next 10 years. That is not acceptable. And we need property tax reform, and we need it now. And when you have a business on Main Street that's paying on 100% of valuation, and you have residential and agricultural paying on 60% of valuation, you have to address this issue. As Representative Burns said, it's one of the key ingredients in us not being competitive in attracting jobs in our state.
Thank you. I see some county supervisors and some previous county supervisors sitting in this room. To have services in a county, city, or school, you need to have X amount of dollars. X amount of dollars. If you shift or lower property taxes from one pot of money, the X amount of dollars is still needed to run the county, or school, or city. So again, the biggest concern, always come to the table and talk about commercial property tax relief. But again, you have to realize you can't shift the burden on another entity as homeowners in ag.
Moving on to the second question, this one is directly to you, Mr. Bartz. What will you do to ensure the interests of the public and residents of nursing homes are safeguarded?
Certainly. I've served on the Human Resources Committee for 14 of my 16 years in the state legislature. It was actually at the bequest of, some of you might remember, Representative B.G. Clark, who has since passed away and represented this area. And B.G. was a very strong advocate of elderly issues. And B.G., when I was first elected in 1990, came to me and said, there's no North Iowan on the Human Resources Committee. And I volunteered to serve on that. It's been a pleasure to serve on that, and it's been a pleasure to work for the most part, in a bipartisan fashion on that particular committee. There's a couple different things that we have to deal with when we're dealing with elderly care. We have to deal with, first of all, in what setting do these individuals wish to be in? There are some that need to be more skilled settings than others. And certainly when you compare that to, say, assisted living or another type of care which is less restrictive, we have to be able, over all of those types of care, to be able to provide the appropriate rules and regulations. One of the things that's been a real problem, and hopefully we'll talk about rules and regulations a little bit more in a future question, is that you get in situations where the services needed by the individual are actually being thwarted by the rules and regulations. So for instance, in Hampton, Iowa, I just had a tour of that facility a couple of weeks ago. It's an assisted living center. Certainly you want to provide care and health and safety for those individuals, but the State Department of Inspections and Appeals actually came in and said, guess what, you can't make cookies in that kitchen that all of those residents are using anymore because it's a public health issue. I think that generally what we need to ensure is that we have enough nursing home inspectors, and I serve on the Administration and Regulation Appropriations Committee, working with Senator Reagan, working with actually Senator Yoakum, who chairs that committee. The administration regulation bill that I voted for this year, I felt very comfortable with, as Senator Yoakum did, in providing additional inspections and inspectors, and working with the Department of Inspections and Appeals to ensure the safety and health.
Thank you. Another one of my backgrounds, I used to work in a nursing home. I was an activity director, and I saw the need to have good quality care in nursing homes. So as a legislature, what I take down to Des Moines is to know that we need to have inspections, surprise inspections. We need to have, there was a law that was passed last session that there's no serious sexual offenders to be allowed in nursing homes. And we set some standard for certified nursing assistants, because after all, if you have a loved one, an elderly, whether it's grandmother, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, in a nursing home, you want to make they have a certain standard of care for them. So those are some of the issues and some of the things we did pass last session or in Des Moines. Thank you.
And then did you vote yes or no on SR 15, a resolution opposing proposed congressional changes to Medicare and Medicaid? And this question begins with you.
SR 15, I voted in favor of that because when I go to the doors, I hear that one of the biggest concerns is elderly people living on fixed incomes. They are dependent so much on their Medicare and their Social Security, and that's why I voted for SR 15.
Well, first of all, no, that's okay, man. First of all, I was wondering when the rabbit was going to get pulled out of the hat tonight. SR 15, first of all, SR 15, an SR is a Senate resolution, which is, of course, first a non-binding resolution. Also, it is particular to the Senate. And what a resolution basically does is it urges a federal government agency or a federal legislator or the president or whatever, to take a course of action or to not take a course of action. I suspect that I voted against the resolution, although I don't have a title of the resolution in front of me, so I apologize. But my suspicion is that it may have something to do with encouraging the federal government regarding Medicare and Medicare reform. What I would say is that many times in the Senate resolution process, these become political gotchas as opposed to bills where we actually get to pass the legislation and we actually turn it into Iowa law. So interestingly enough, even though that's a federal issue, federal Medicare, you probably could be construed as a senator if you voted against a Senate resolution to somehow be voting against a federal program, which is kind of an interesting concept since it is non-binding and has no effect and does not change one federal iota.
Well, again, as Senator Bartz pointed out, resolution urges, and I quote, take course of action, and I guess to take a course of action to protect Medicare is a position that I took, and that's why I voted for it.
Yeah, a couple days ago, 3 people were arrested in Council Bluffs for voter fraud. What will you do to ensure that voter fraud like this won't continue to take place?
My question is for me, Matt?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, first of all, I serve on the Administrative Rules Review Committee, and yesterday, actually, I was visiting with Secretary Matt Schultz regarding this issue. The statistics are somewhat disconcerting to me. Recently, at a presentation to the Administrative Rules Review Committee, it was announced that there are 3,582 non-citizens may have registered to vote in Iowa, and 1,208 of these individuals voted in the 2010 election. The information for this is generated by the Iowa Department of Transportation and records of non-citizens who have obtained a driver's license in Iowa and provided that driver's license number when registering to vote. So I think the one thing that really concerns me is that we need to talk about the three pillars of elections in our state: election integrity, voter rights, and voter integrity. And each of them are extremely important. So I actually criticized Secretary Schultz a little bit with his plan a week ago or so in front of the Administrative Rules Review Committee, because I don't think he was focusing enough on what I want to call voter integrity. That is, voters know that they shouldn't be doing things that are illegal. Voters know that they shouldn't be engaging in fraudulent practices, whether that be registering twice, whether that be a situation where they, attempt to, sign something, forging it for somebody else, whatever. And frankly, I think that we need to have stronger voting rules to protect the sanctity of voting in the state, and I'm very supportive of what they would call photo ID or voter ID in the state. You gotta show your ID to buy beer. You gotta show your ID to buy cigarettes. You gotta show your ID for tons of things in this state. It's considered common practice, and yet we don't require somebody to show a photo ID when they vote.
Thank you, Matt. I always believed only eligible Iowans have the right to vote, first and foremost. Being a county supervisor or working at a county level or local level, we have great auditors across the state of Iowa. Great auditors. They are the ones locally that do the elections. If at any time any one of those auditors, and they have their own group called ISAC that they meet and talk, at any time, if any one of those auditors feel that there's a problem or concern, they should bring it to the legislature, and we should have a chance to talk about and see what those levels of concerns are, and then at that time address it.
Can I follow up then?
Sure.
Would you support a photo ID resolution?
There's so many ways that you cannot get photo ID, and for that reason, probably not.
It's a very interesting issue because Senator Wilhelm chairs the local government committee. County auditors have talked to me about this issue. County auditors did have bills that they wished to have introduced, and those bills died in the Senate local government committee because Senator Wilhelm didn't wish to take them up.
Did you vote for allowable growth in schools? And then also, can you lay out your thoughts on what needs to be done to reform education? We'll begin 3 minutes for Mrs. Wilhelm.
Allowable growth, I actually ran the bill 311 for 4 years in the Senate. I listened earlier for Representative Burns' remarks. I'd like to go over those a little bit myself. If we're going to look at funding, we've got to look at it as a whole. He talked earlier about having this rural discussion committee task force meeting, and that's fine, that's great. But the thing is, you cannot just take away funding to the schools without them having some kind of ways of contraindicating that or whatever, because the funding goes to the schools. And one thing too, if you don't do funding schools, you don't fund the schools. Again, going back to the local government, X amount of dollars to run the schools. So if they don't get it from the state, if we don't give them for the 2% allowable growth, the likelihood that they're going to raise your property taxes will be there. So again, we have to talk about the whole picture. It's so easy to say, we need to not fund schools by not giving 2% allowable growth. Schools still need money. And if they can't get it from the state, and they need it in their budget, they will look at the other alternative, and that's to raise your local property taxes. Thank you.
And 3 minutes for you as well.
Wow, there's a lot to talk about here. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the school aid funding formula. because the school aid funding formula is a combination of both property tax and state aid. So this ties in with the one of the property tax bills that the House sent over to the Senate, because if you're truly going to provide equal education in the state of Iowa and mitigate those differences between property-rich districts and property-poor districts, one of the best ways that you can do that is have the state buy up more of the state aid that is currently paid by property tax. The House actually had that in one of their property tax proposals, which would have been great for education, because it would have actually lowered the burden of inequality between property-rich districts and property-poor districts, and it would have been a more stable source for schools. So that's one issue, is the formula itself. Second, specific to education reform, it was the one chart that I brought tonight, and I wish I would have distributed copies of it. But, you know, combined district cost in the state of Iowa is now, in the last about 15 years, is more than double the rate of inflation in relationship to other programs. Our change in weighted enrollments, we're down about 25,000 students in the state since 1999. And our scores in relationship to other states continue to decline, our test scores. So basically what we have is a scenario where we have less students, more money, and lower scores. So I agree with Senator Wilhelm, you got to look at it the whole picture. And one of the things we need to do in any education reform package is we need to talk about the fact that, as Representative Burns said once again, you just can't dump money at this thing without having some changes in the policy, and hopefully we can get that in a future question. The last thing I want to mention is the allowable growth rate, because Senator Wilhelm, in some respects, is boasting a little bit about the fact that she's been very involved in advocating for that for that 2% allowable growth. Well, you know, I did some comparison shopping, and I think the audience might need to know this, that the difference between Senator Wilhelm's record on voting for 2% allowable growth and then having the governor cut it by 10%, basically, is a major difference from when I was serving in the legislature in 2001 and 2000 and voted for a 4% allowable growth rate, completely funded. And we had the budget guarantee for small schools that had declining enrollment. There's a gigantic difference between those two records on education. And I think there's a major difference between saying you're for allowable growth, not funding it, or then having to cut it, or voting for allowable growth that's actually larger, and the buck stops here. We funded it, the schools appreciated it, and we were getting good educational results at that particular time.
And you're right, I ran a 2% allowable growth. I did not cut the allowable growth. The governor did a cross-the-board cut. I think it was in October or November. One thing about government, one thing about the state versus federal, we can't be in the red on June 30th. The first year I was there, we made some drastic changes. July 1st started, first of the budget. We started getting, the governor started getting into the revenues a few months later, realized that there was a definite drop-off of all taxes that were coming in, whether they were corporate, income taxes, everything. There was a dramatic concern that we're going to let up potentially be in the red or close to be the red, so the governor made a decision to do a 10% across-the-board cut. So then why, 2 years later, we fought for at least 2% allowable growth and had to end up with 0 as a compromise?
The governor's reform plan, I'd like to get each of your thoughts on that, and what you like, what you don't like, and what you would like, what should be approved. Start with you, Mr. Bartz.
Very briefly, I think there's two things that I think I've kind of focused on as a legislator, and I have to start with a story. I'm not a teacher. I do not serve on the education committee. You have to choose, those areas that you wish to have your expertise in. So I'm kind of a little bit out of my arena on these particular questions. But as a legislator, you have to also pay attention to all the other things and go to good people for advice. I am a Sunday school teacher, though, however. And I teach 7th and 8th grade Sunday school. Somehow my wife roped me into doing that for a few years. When I have an 8th grader that cannot pronounce the word disciple in Sunday school, I know that there's something wrong with the education system. And I have seen some of those readers in my classes, and it really concerns me because I know that they're behind. So regarding specifically the third grade testing and the not socially promoting folks, I actually support that. I think it's a measure of tough love, but I think it's better to maybe be tough on somebody's self-esteem in third grade and hold them back a year and make sure that they have the remedial help that they need. Because to spend the first 3 years or the first 5 years of your life learning to read, you spend the next rest of your life reading to learn. And so I think that's a critical brain point. The other thing that it does is from a taxpayer perspective, is that if this individual ends up being behind the curve, so to speak, all the way through high school, and they just keep getting socially promoted, that ends up costing that person more self-esteem their first year in college when they have to go back and take remedial classes, and it ends up costing the taxpayer more money at the community college level or at the four-year college level or whatever education level, because it will take more time to get that individual through college. And so that's one thing that I support. Second issue, and you know, maybe this isn't, I don't know, we probably disagree on that and probably disagree on the second one, but I think it's a difference in philosophy. We want great teachers to be able to teach. And one of the problems I think right now with the current seniority system is there are great teachers coming into the classroom. Those are always the first ones that are let go because of a seniority system that rewards only for seniority and not what you're doing in the classroom. And I would like to see that change, frankly.
Thank you. When the governor's blueprint came out after his education summit 2 years ago, I had a chance to review it. I had my opinions of it. But I thought, this is my opinion. Like Senator Barth said, I'm not an educator. I can read the blueprint, but I don't have to work with the blueprint if it passes as it was presented. So what I did, I had listening posts throughout the area, and I brought in every county seat in my new area, I should say. And during that conversation, I had a great group of people, very diversified, from educators to administrators to some students to school board members to some parents. And the first thing I said, here's a blueprint. The first thing I should say, that everybody that attended wants to have a world-class education system in Iowa. There's no buts about that. But then I said, let's take this blueprint, let's look at it. What do you like? What do you want to modify? What do you want to remove? And what do you want to add? Because after all, you are the people that are going to implement this if and when it passes. You are the people. And I tell you what, it opened my eyes a little bit too. There was a teacher that told me that when it came to third grade reading, and she said maybe it's from how we do things. Because kids, you read to the classroom like in kindergarten first and most of second, and then it switches around like in third. The student starts reading aloud. So again, I think the thing is we have to have a conversation how to make Iowa #1 in education. But it comes from the bottom up, and that's where it should be from. Thank you.
Well, just one thing to add, I don't want to make this a rebuttal, but another thing that I think we need to talk about a little bit here tonight is it's commonly referred to as the Senior Year Plus program, which is that segue from you know, high school seniors into college. I've worked very hard with North Iowa Area Community College on rules and regulations regarding making that as seamless as possible. And in some respects, we still have a few things that we could do. I'd like to see that in an education reform package too. But we're part of the way there through rules and regulations changes at the state level. And we'll continue to work to try to make that a more seamless so that those individuals that are able to take those Senior Year Plus courses can expedite their getting through college and join the workforce sooner.
Our next question is addressed directly to you. Senator Wilhelm, in one of your brochures, you state you balance the state budget without raising taxes, but my taxes keep going up. How can you make this claim?
Well, again, the biggest thing when it comes to state in regards to property taxes at home. If we don't fund things, there's a probability that their taxes might go up. But Your property taxes at home are a combination of the needs of the county, the needs of the city, and the needs of the school. So we can balance our budget in Des Moines without raising property taxes. And hopefully your local entities, with looking at the services they need to provide, they can do the same at home.
A couple of things I think would be pertinent here. First of all, I'm assuming the question is relating specifically to probably the fiscal year 2011 and the 2010 and the 2011 budget. I mean, remember fiscal year budgets are separate than calendar year budgets. And what I want to focus on is the last 2 years of what I'm going to call the Culver administration. Serving in the minority, one of 18, it was extremely frustrating to see the situation where there was budget gimmickry used in order to balance the budget, and where they were robbing things like what we commonly refer to as the trust fund, designated separate funds, specifically the senior trust fund. The senior trust fund, which was established actually when I was in the legislature the first time with some settlements. That fund was supposed to be providing things like public health for seniors in our state. And what they basically went in is they went in and started borrowing. Well, on the federal level, we all know what happens when you start borrowing from the trust funds, whether it be Social Security or Medicare or whatever. The federal government has got into big trouble doing that. They got into big trouble doing that in the state. Senator Wilhelm also talked about the fact that it was the governor that made the 10% across the board cut, not the legislature. Yeah, in essence, it was the governor that made the across the board cut, but the governor had to make that cut because the legislature wasn't using prudent spending and balancing the budget the way they needed to. So, I mean, you can play all the games you wish to play in regarding to say the budget is balanced, and in reality, she's correct in saying Iowa's budget has to be balanced. We're not like the federal government, we don't print money. But the reality of it is it boils down to how did you balance the budget, not if the budget's balanced. And you know, if you could put off expenses until the next fiscal year, hypothetically, that doesn't show up on your budget, so your budget balances. If you can use one-time money to fund ongoing expenses, you can hire additional state employees. That doesn't show up on your budget not being balanced. But I'll guarantee you, 5 years, 2 years down the road, or 5 years down the road, it's a major, major problem. And that's something that I think has changed with the new governor, and it's something that has changed with people like Josh Burns in the Iowa House, because they understand budget projections and they put us on a 2-year budget. But that first 2 years, particularly, that Senator Wilhelm and I served with under Governor Culver, it was extremely frustrating because yes, it balanced, but it was completely gamesmanship in making it balance, and it came home to roost. In 2010, 2011, with the 10% across the board governor's cuts.
I guess what I want to say is that, when cities and counties and schools do their budget, they do it on property taxes. They're more or less guaranteed they're going to get that money in to provide the services. When the biggest change I had, when the state does their budget, they do it on revenues. And we can't spend over 99% of the projected revenues. So when we did our budget, it was our projected value. And like I said earlier, what happened was quarterly taxes didn't come in. I think corporation tax were like 30-some% down. Don't quote me, it's been years and I'm getting old to remember exact dates and money, but percentages. But it was at least, I think, in the vicinity of 30% less than projected. So drastic measures had to be done. Governor Culver took it upon himself to do it, and that's what happened.
There's back and forth, but I think what really matters to the homeowners is property taxes, and commercial property taxes, home property taxes. What is the best, for both of you, what's the best way to handle that issue, reform? And we'll begin with you, and I'll treat that as a question. So
Certainly, Matt. Well, the best way to, first of all, if you understand the history of property taxes in the state of Iowa, the formula is the 1977-78 formula, when you had people like Lowell Norland and Del Stromer, forming the compromise on how to deal with property tax reform. And you have to understand the history of what was going on that time. inflation rates close to 20%. Farmland values were just going through the roof. And you had, things like Proposition 13 in California with Howard Javits, I think was the guy's name. I might not have the name exactly correct, but where they wanted to do a property tax freeze. So Stromer and Norland got together. They came up with a property tax formula that basically tied residential and agricultural and said it cannot increase more than 4% per year. And Iowans wanted that. It was bipartisan. It was signed by the governor. They didn't quite have enough money to fund the commercial part. So they said, we'll come back and do that. Come back and do that a couple years later. Fast forward 30 years. If you own a residence, if you own a farm, you're taxed on basically about 50% of your valuation. If you have a Main Street business here in Osage, you're taxed on 100% of your valuation. And that's one of the reasons why Representative Burns talks about this business climate is 41. Now, when you talk about reforming the system, you have to also understand when is the best time to reform the system. It's an absolute awful time to reform property tax system if you are in a situation with declining valuations. Because that is the point where you really, really hurt city and county governments, because they are dependent upon property taxes, their revenue. But the best time to reform property tax is when valuations are actually going up. And frankly, because of the productivity factor for agriculture land valuations and taxable valuation is going up. Because we're past, for the most part, some of the housing slump, residential valuations are going up. So when I mentioned that $2.3 billion projected increase, that's Department of Management and Department of Revenue looking ahead in the long run and saying, no bill means 2.3% or $2.3 billion property tax increase for residences and for farmers and for commercial business owners in the next 10 years. I believe that's unacceptable. But the time to do property tax reform, well, it should have been last year and it should have been the year before, because it would have really helped us in the business competitive climate. But you can't keep promising this thing and not deliver. And the House and the governor and a bipartisan group of 2/3 of the legislature delivered, including the 24 Republicans that all voted for the House plan, 24 Republicans in the Senate that all voted for the House plan. And it really, Senator Gronstal, who could not get his own bill out of his own chamber, really has to bear the burden of this property tax increase that's occurring.
I think after listening to the back and forth, property tax issues is not simple. It is definitely not simple. You have, like Senator Barth pointed out, when they tied residential and ag together, you have levies that you can't only go up to so much levy in county supervisor, the general fund. You can only have this levy. You can only put money in and pay out only certain things in that levy. Then you have the rural levy. And then you have, it's unbelievable the different levels of checks and balances, and property taxes is a complex, very complex thing to address. And I think that's what's taken us having this conversation that's lasting for a couple sessions, because it is complex. And I go back to, the worst thing we could do is to make it worse. So I think we should be very careful about how we approach property tax reform and who it's going to maybe fall back on in the future. So again, at any time and any place, I would love to sit down and talk to people that understand the property tax system in the state of Iowa, because, like I said, it's so complicated. I could bore you to tears right now, to be honest with you. Thank you.
Well, yes, it's a complicated issue, but it's simple when you talk about the numbers. And here's the current law. Ag land projected to increase $12 billion in valuation in the next 10 years. Residential projected to increase $49 billion. That's a gigantic increase. Commercial, industrial, and railroad projected to increase $5 billion. Total valuation about $66 billion for that $2.3 billion property tax increase. Those are numbers right out of Department of Management, numbers right out of Department of Revenue. Under the governor's original proposal, which wasn't good enough for Senator Wilhelm, that residential would have dropped from a $49 billion valuation increase to a $29 billion increase. And one of her major concerns is that it shifts, so to speak. The reality of it is the real shift is taking place in the current formula. And once again, a $2.3 billion property tax increase is not acceptable. in my mind. We needed to pass it. We needed to pass it this year. We needed to pass it last year.
How do you feel about livestock confinement? And 3 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Livestock confinements, a lot of it depends on the manager. I mean, there's many livestock confinements we have in every county. When I first got active or was elected in to be a supervisor, there was actually earthen lagoons were being done for livestock confinements. I think there's been definitely a trend that changes that. I think there's still more work to do to make it environmentally safer. But there is definitely a need out there. We still need to serve our people with food. The only alternative I can think of is, farmers have to live. And, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or when, I'm not going to give 30 years ago when I was raised on the farm or more, I would have never thought that we would be raising grapes in the state of Iowa and producing wine. Farmers are looking for alternatives. I think we should keep that in focus. All they want to do is to make money, make a living. So if we want to get away from livestock confinements, let's find some alternatives that they can succeed in.
Well, first of all, this is a stomach-wrenching issue, particularly for agriculture communities, because in some cases it divides agricultural communities. I was there during the 1995 livestock debate, the 1996 livestock debate, and the 2002 livestock debate. And at that particular time in 1995, actually came to the same conclusion that now Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack, who then was State Senator Vilsack, came to in supporting the legislation in 1995. Since that time, the Iowa legislature has debated livestock in 1996, Senate passed bill, which I believe I supported, and then again in 2002, which is where you got what's commonly referred to as the matrix. And since that time, since 2002, in some respects, the debate is kind of simmered, might be the best way to describe it. I mean, there are still issues with health and the environment, as Senator Wilhelm mentioned, that I think need to be addressed. But certainly, the ag diversity and feeding 7 billion people in the world is something that technology, we're probably never going to go back to 160 acres and every farmer having 6 sows or 10 sows. Certainly, as a hog producer, when I quit raising hogs in 2002, we were running about a 15 to 20 sow operation, farrow to finish. And 1998 was a horrible year to be raising livestock, and we'd lived through it. That was the year that we had lower than depression prices. And in some respects, that's a problem with cycles in agriculture. There are some up and down cycles. Technology has increased. I will say that if you go west of Osage here, right at the Mitchell corner, there's a large building that some people might consider a confinement building. But interestingly enough, that's not a confinement building. That's actually a building that has free-range chickens in it. And so when you talk about niche markets and diversity, technology is actually affecting those industries too, whether it be the organic industry or whether it be the niche market like non-GMO crops, like non-GMO soybeans, which is a market to Japan. And then the final thing, specific to livestock, conservation stewardship is near and dear to me. As some of you may know, I served 5 years with USDA in Washington, D.C. So many of the things that you see in Iowa right now, the buffer strips, the terraces, I actually had, as the regional assistant chief for NRCS, 13 states, including Iowa, with $1 billion budget and 4,000 employees that worked on conservation issues. And you can check this out, the third CSP contract in Worth County.
Then for our final question, a lot of the polls are showing that jobs and the economy, at least on the national level, are top, far and away, the #1 issue for everyone. So if you can bring that to a local level, how would you ensure economic competitiveness in this state and district? And we'll begin with Mr. Bartz. That's 3 minutes, please.
Well, first of all, we've probably talked the property tax issue to death. So I'll generally say that's one of the things that we need to talk about. Number 2, rules and regulation reform. I had the, once again, going back to the Administrative Rules Review Committee, had the opportunity to chair the Reopen for Iowa Business public hearings on rules and regulations in the state of Iowa 2 years ago. We had over 1,000 people show up, receive testimony, and receive a ton of good ideas on how to handle rules and regulation reform. One rule in specific, doesn't affect Osage, but it could have hypothetically affected Osage in a big way. You have a municipal utility here. In December of 2010, there was a state rule passed by the DNR called the RICE rule, Reciprocating Internal Combustion Engine Rule. That rule would have forced, based upon, it was more stringent than the federal EPA rule, number one, which is an issue that we can deal with in further questions regarding this. But it would have forced municipal utilities, RECs, hospitals, anybody that had emergency generating capacity to actually take out those generators that they might only use for 10 hours a year, or in a peak capacity day or something like that. Take those generators out and replace them with new equipment, even if those generators were operating perfectly and doing their job as emergency generators. In the city of New Hampton, that cost for that municipal utility would have cost the average homeowner in New Hampton about $30 a month, or close to $300 a year. That was a case where a rule that nobody probably in this room has heard of, or maybe not very many people have heard of, would have basically stymied job creation and stymied the economy in the New Hampton area, because how would you like to be their chamber executive person or their economic development person going out and trying to sell a new company coming to town when they visit with the person on the street and they said, yeah, my municipal utilities just raised my rates by $30 a month because they got to take an emergency generator out and replace it. Rules and regulation reform is real. The U.S. Department of Labor rules would have negatively affected agriculture in this state to a gigantic extent, and they would have stymied job creation. The last thing, and you know, let's face it, legislators don't create jobs. We can maybe create an economy or create an environment that creates jobs, but job creation is done by the entrepreneurs and the small business people that build things and that build it. And so in some respects, you know, to have the full recovery that we need nationally and the full recovery that we need to have here in Iowa, and keep in mind that unemployment is in its 43rd month of above 8%, we need to be sure that we reward job creators for doing the right thing. And removing onerous rules and regulations is one of those ways that we can reward those job creators.
You're right, on the doors. That's my biggest conversations I have is about jobs. There are many working families out there that want either they have a job but they want a better paying job, or they're without a job, they're getting by, you know, maybe doing part-time jobs. But as we all know, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 of those to put food on the table and pay your bills. So one thing I like to approach when it comes to jobs is, you know, I viewed a factory in New Hampton, Trimart. They're looking for work. They're looking for workers. But the factories anymore, they need skilled workers. They need skilled workers. They say that there's around 80–85% shortage of skilled workers. So I think the way we should approach that, and we have, but I want to continue and strengthen it, is to work with our community colleges. Work with our community colleges because they're the ones that can go between the employers and see what kind of workforce is out there and then try to match them up. Now again, that takes time, effort, especially out in rural Iowa. It takes a lot of traveling and making those contacts. So it comes to the funding source. And that's why we did give a little money last year to community college for that purpose alone. So again, we need to promote jobs in one way, initially, in rural Iowa, by strengthening our community colleges. I think that will help employers find those skilled workers that are needed, and I'll get people out in the workforce that wants that better paying job. Thank you.
First of all, Senator Wilhelm's last comment, I agree. And on community college issues, you know, if you compare the records, you will see that our records are very, very similar in regard to community college funding. One thing that I do want to also add in regard to not only the property tax, the part that she talked about, skilled workforce, but I think the other thing that we need to talk about is how are we rating in regard to our business climate, our business economy, and how are our ratings with that business community. And interestingly enough, once again, this is public record, but if you happen to belong to NFIB, which is a bellwether organization, it's not one of the big business organizations. NFIB is a very small business organization. Main Street, I know I see those plates when I do Main Streets in, you know, Osage or St. Ansgar or Charles City for that matter. NFIB does a rating of legislators on their small business record. If you would look at my record, it's historically very high. Senator Wilhelm's record is a 0.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. I appreciate that. It's been an interesting discussion. But what I want to say the most is that I'm going to continue to knock doors. I'm going to continue to listen to people. I'm going to continue to be out there. But I also tell people, if I miss you, if for some reason we don't meet, please do not hesitate to call me. I can't help you. I can't know what's in your world and without you dropping me an email or giving me a phone call. I mean, this is what it's all about. What we discuss and what you share with me, that's what I take down to Des Moines. That's how I can help you. So again, I appreciate your time, I appreciate your support, and thank you again.
Thank you, Matt. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to dialogue with you this evening. It's indeed been a privilege and an honor to represent North Iowa in the Iowa legislature for the past 16 years. I think my voting record in many respects speaks for itself. When you serve in the legislature, you take literally thousands and thousands of votes. And I'm sure that some of those votes can be misconstrued to somehow make a flyer, fancy flyer, or a television clip. But I think when you look at my record, the people of North Iowa have sent me back, I believe 5 times through 5 elections in order to represent them. I hope also that tonight I've been able to lay out my plans on how I view creating jobs, how I view us having to lower property taxes and reduce government red tape. And I hope that you will come to the conclusion that I will work hard to defend, to promote, and to protect your values. I sincerely thank you for your time, and I respectfully ask for your vote in the upcoming November 6th general election for Senate District 26. Thank you.